I asked what time the wedding was. My daughter-in-law said, "It happened yesterday." She didn't know I was the one who paid for the venue. The morning light in Amarillo was soft and forgiving, the kind that makes even old skin look gentle. I stood before the mirror, smoothing the lilac dress I'd pressed the night before, the one I planned to wear to my son's wedding. My hair was curled the old-fashioned way with sponge rollers and patience. The lipstick was the same shade I'd worn when his father and I married 48 years ago, still faintly smelling of rose. I reached for my purse, glanced at the clock, and checked my phone for the message that would tell me when to leave. There was one new text. "It happened yesterday. We didn't want any drama." At first I thought it was a mistake, maybe a joke. Maybe Haley's clumsy humor, the kind that always stung, no matter how sweetly she said it. But the more I stared, the more the words sank through me, quiet and final as dirt hitting a coffin lid. It happened yesterday. The wedding, the one I helped make possible, had already taken place without me. My knees weakened. I had to sit down on the edge of my bed, still clutching my purse like it could anchor me to the world I just lost. I could only whisper, "Yesterday?" That word echoed around the small house that used to hold laughter. If you feel justice deserves celebration, smash that hype button. Let us keep stories like this alive, echoing far, far away. Your support helps us bring understanding and love to those who deserve it. Thank you so much. Keep listening. I looked at the photo on my dresser, Jeremy at 5 years old, holding a paper bouquet he made in kindergarten. "For Mommy," the card had said. I remembered thinking I'd keep that flower forever, just to remind myself that even struggle could bloom into something beautiful. I had been the one who paid the initial deposit for their dream venue, $7,600 in cash, exactly 20% of the total. It wasn't a gift they asked for, but one I offered because I wanted my son's day to be perfect. The place wasn't just any hall, it was the same garden ballroom where my husband and I had said our vows. Back then, the floors still creaked with history, and the chandeliers looked like floating fire. When I wrote the check, I didn't tell Jeremy or Haley. They would have refused it, or worse, they would have turned it into a story about needy old people who can't let go. The manager, Mr. Alvarez, remembered me instantly. He'd been just a boy when he first started there, the son of the man who ran the place in the 70s. When I handed him the check, he smiled and said, "Mrs. Carter, you still have founder's privilege." I nodded, not fully realizing how important those words would become. Founder's privilege meant that any changes to the date or contract required my written consent. "A courtesy for legacy clients," he said. "Don't worry, Mrs. Carter. If anyone tries to pull a fast one, you'll know before they do." Now, reading Haley's message, I knew someone had pulled fast and deep. I thought back to 2 weeks earlier when I'd asked her, gently, "What time does the ceremony start, dear?" She'd laughed, not meeting my eyes. "Oh, Maureen, you don't have to stress about that. Just pray it doesn't rain, okay?" That was my clue, wasn't it? That brittle tone, that sugar-soaked dismissal. I had become what every aging mother fears most, a ghost that still breathes. Present in name, erased in every plan that once included me. I'd heard it before, from people who had already decided I was irrelevant. I rose from the bed, still holding the phone. The dress shimmered faintly in the morning sun, mocking me with its careful perfection. I imagined the wedding, the guests smiling, Haley in her lace gown, Jeremy beaming beside her. Did they toast? Did they dance? Did he think of me when he said his vows? I doubted it. The silence in the house pressed on me like a weight. For a moment, I wished I could scream, call someone, demand an explanation. But then another voice inside me, the quiet one that had carried me through years of widowhood, whispered, "No, you don't beg for seats at tables you built." I stood, walked to the dresser, and unclipped the pearl earrings I'd planned to wear. They were gifts from my late husband, George. He'd told me once, "These are for when you're proud of yourself, Maureen, not when you're proving yourself." I set them back in their case and closed the lid. Outside, the wind stirred the old oak leaves across my yard. I could still smell the faint sweetness of the honeysuckle Jeremy had helped me plant decades ago. I had thought that someday he and his bride would stand there for photos, smiling beside me. Instead, The flowers were the only witnesses to my disappointment. A small laugh escaped me, then not bitter, just tired. I whispered to the air, "You win, Haley. You finally made me invisible." But invisibility can be useful. While they believed they'd cut me out, they'd forgotten something simple. Names on contracts matter, and mine was still printed in ink on the venue agreement. I took a deep breath and picked up my suitcase. My flight to Santorini was booked months ago, a gift I gave myself for after the wedding. I had planned to leave the morning after the ceremony, thinking I'd carry happy memories with me across the ocean. As I locked the front door, I looked one last time at the lilac dress hanging by the mirror. "Maybe next time," I murmured, though I knew there wouldn't be one. The phone buzzed again in my purse, another message from Haley. I didn't open it. I simply slipped the phone into my bag and stepped into the waiting taxi. Some stories don't need confrontation to find their ending. They just need time and silence sharp enough to be heard. When I arrived at their house that afternoon, the sun in Dallas was cruel and bright, the kind that made white paint look blinding. The air smelled of expensive candles and lemon polish, nothing like the old cedar scent that used to fill our home when Jeremy was a boy. I had called earlier, no answer. So I came anyway, with a manila folder in my purse and something heavier in my chest. Haley opened the door wearing a silk robe, her hair tied high, a glass of something sparkling in her hand. She looked surprised for half a second, then forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, Maureen," she said, dragging my name like it was a burden. "You're here. I thought maybe you'd be resting." "I came to give you something," I said quietly. I held out the envelope. "Open it when you get home later, all right?" She looked at it like it might be dirty. "What is it?" "Just a little paperwork," I said. "Something you'll want to see." She took it with 2 fingers and gave a small laugh. "If this is about the house, you should know we're not interested in any inheritance drama. We're doing just fine on our own." I smiled a little. "I'm sure you are." Jeremy appeared behind her, tall and uneasy. His tie loosened, his eyes darting between us. "Hey, Mom," he said softly. "What's going on?" "Nothing at all," Haley answered for me. "Your mother just dropped by to deliver whatever this is." She shook the folder lightly, as if it were an unimportant flyer. "I'll open it later." "Open it when you're home," I repeated. My voice was calm, but even I could hear the quiet weight in it. "It's for you." She smirked. "You mean for us?" Jeremy didn't say a word. He just looked at the floor, his shoulders tight. For a fleeting moment, his eyes met mine just long enough to say he knew this was wrong, but not brave enough to stop it. That silence told me everything, how far he'd gone from the boy who once built me a birdhouse for Mother's Day, who used to say, "I'll always take care of you, Mom." I had imagined that one day Haley might soften him, might make him more kind. Instead, she hardened him like wax, left too long in the sundae. I looked around their house. Every surface gleamed, but it didn't feel like home. The only picture of Jeremy as a child was tucked into a corner shelf, half hidden behind a vase. The frame was one I had given them years ago. I knew because I'd painted the edge myself. Haley noticed me looking and said sweetly, "We've been redecorating. We're trying to go for a more minimal vibe. You know, less clutter." Less clutter. That was her polite way of calling me unnecessary. I nodded, smiling just enough to be polite. "Minimalism suits you." She folded her arms. "You know, Maureen, you really should have called first. We've had a long week, with the wedding and everything." "Everything," I echoed. "Yes, it must have been beautiful." She tilted her head. "It was perfect, actually. You would have loved it if things hadn't been so tense. But we didn't want any drama. I think that was best for everyone." Jeremy shifted uncomfortably beside her. "Haley," he murmured. She cut him a sharp look and continued, "You see, some people just make things heavier than they need to be. I don't mean that in a bad way, of course. Just, older people sometimes can't let go." I didn't flinch. I'd been insulted more creatively before. "I understand," I said softly. "You've built a nice life here. You should protect it." Haley smiled, triumphant. "Exactly. We worked hard for this. And if people could just be supportive instead of controlling, we could actually have a normal relationship. Honestly, If you were a little more reasonable, we might even love you more. That word love came out like a curse. Haley, Jeremy said, finally looking up. Enough. But she only shrugged. What? I'm just saying the truth. If she'd stop acting like she owns us, maybe we'd want her around more. The room was silent for a beat. I heard the faint hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the kitchen clock. Then I spoke, quietly, firmly. I never wanted to own you, Haley. I only wanted to see you happy. But I suppose happiness looks different when it comes at someone else's expense. Her smile faltered, but only for a second. You can see yourself out now, Maureen. We have a dinner reservation. Jeremy didn't move to hug me, or even touch my arm. He just gave me that same helpless, guilty look he used to have as a boy when he broke something and didn't want to admit it. I walked past them toward the door. My steps were steady, my hands steady too. At the threshold, I turned and said, "Be sure to open that envelope when you're home. Don't lose it." Haley raised her eyebrows. "Oh, don't worry. We'll keep it safe." I looked at my son, Jeremy. He met my eyes for the first time that day. "Yeah, Mom? I hope someday you remember who taught you how to keep things safe." His mouth opened, but no words came out. I stepped outside. The heat slapped me, but the wind was soft, brushing my hair like an old friend. I walked slowly down their driveway, feeling strangely light. Behind me, their door closed with a click, neat, final, like punctuation on a sentence that no longer needed rewriting. As the taxi pulled away, my mind drifted back to a different time. The hospital parking lot 30 years ago, the night I sold my own blood plasma so Jeremy could stay in college. I remembered the way the nurse had looked at me when she saw my age and the scars on my hands. "You're doing this for your son?" she'd asked. "Yes," I'd said, "for his future." Now that same son stood behind a door, letting his wife talk to me like a stain on her tablecloth. I had given him everything, and somehow that taught him nothing. The car turned onto the main road. Beside me, the manila folder held a quiet truth, proof that the woman they dismissed still had power. Let them think it was over. Some debts don't need collecting, only remembering. The cab rolled past the edge of town, the Texas horizon stretching wide and endless. My Santorini ticket sat folded in my purse, a trip I'd once planned after a happy wedding. Now I was just leaving. The taxi hummed softly as I recalled signing the venue contract, the same place George and I once promised forever. Mr. Alvarez, the venue manager, had handed me the pen and said, "Mrs. Carter, it's good to see you again. You still qualify for our founder's privilege clause. It's rare these days." I smiled at him. "I'm not sure I'll ever use it, but it's nice to know it's there." He chuckled, tapping the line on the document. "Any schedule change requires written approval from the original depositor. Keeps everything honest." I nodded, though at the time it seemed like a formality, a polite little relic from a more courteous era. "Honest," I repeated. I hadn't realized how prophetic that word would become. The cab stopped at the airport. I paid the driver and waved off his help. My back was bent, not my will. Inside, coffee and perfume filled the air. Families hugged, lovers parted, and I moved through unseen. At my gate, I sat by the window. Then my phone rang. Haley. Her voice exploded through the speaker before I could even say hello. "What the hell is this, Maureen?" I said nothing. "I just opened that damn envelope," she shrieked. "You paid for 20% of our venue? 20%? Why didn't you just pay for the whole thing, you walking corpse?" The words hit like cold water. Sharp, but not unexpected. I could almost see her pacing in her living room, hair disheveled, pride unraveling. Maybe Jeremy was standing behind her, silent again. Maybe not. It didn't matter. "Do you know what you've done?" she continued. "Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? We thought we got a discount because they loved us, because we were special. You made us look pathetic, Maureen." Still, I said nothing. I simply listened, like I used to when Jeremy was a child, throwing tantrums after bedtime. Some people grow older, but they never grow up. "I should have known you'd ruin it somehow," she spat. "You just couldn't stand that the spotlight wasn't on you for once. You always have to be the savior, the poor little widow with her checkbook. You think this makes you noble? It makes you pitiful. There was a sharp sound, maybe something slammed on her end of the line. I imagined her standing amid the pieces of her perfect illusion, finally realizing how fragile it had always been. When she finally paused for breath, I spoke for the first time. My voice was soft, almost kind. "Haley, you're very loud for someone who just discovered who paid for her wedding." "You think this is funny?" she hissed. "You think this makes you powerful?" "I think," I said, "that it makes me quiet." And then I ended the call. I set the phone down and closed my eyes as people hurried by, living lives untouched by mine. When my flight was called, I boarded. Texas shrank beneath the clouds, golden fields fading into memory. I thought of George's faith, that love was strength. Maybe he was right. I sipped orange juice, opened my purse, and touched the faded contract I'd kept. I traced the words slowly, "Original depositor," and smiled. The world might forget, but paper doesn't. As the plane crossed over the Atlantic, I felt something in me unclench. There was no bitterness left, no lingering ache, just a clear understanding that silence can be sharper than revenge. Haley would scream, Jeremy would hide, and eventually, they'd both realize that I hadn't ruined their lives. They had done that themselves, the moment they decided that an old woman's love was something to be ashamed of. The captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing clear skies all the way to Greece. I leaned back in my seat, watching the light flicker across the clouds. Somewhere far below, Texas faded into dusk, taking with it all the noise and cruelty that used to fill my house. I whispered, more to myself than anyone, "Let them talk, let them rage. I'm done being their shadow." And for the first time in decades, I meant it. It started 3 days after I landed in Santorini. The sea outside my balcony glimmered like a sheet of glass, the air soft and salted. I had just poured myself a cup of Greek coffee when my phone began to vibrate on the table. At first, I ignored it. I had promised myself I would. But it kept buzzing. Again and again, notifications, missed calls, messages piling one after another. When I finally looked, I saw Jeremy's name among them, then Haley's, and dozens more I didn't recognize. My heart didn't race, it just sank, heavy and knowing. Something had happened. I opened one message from a neighbor back home. It contained a link to a TikTok video. The caption read, "When your influencer wedding gets shut down because you pissed off the wrong mother-in-law." I pressed play. The video was shaky, filmed on someone's phone. The camera panned over a lavish ballroom I knew too well. Ivory walls, crystal chandeliers, the same stage where I had once danced with George in his brown suit and dusty boots. But this time, instead of laughter, there was chaos. Haley was in the middle of the room, screaming through tears, her white dress tangled in the hem of her own fury. Jeremy stood beside her, pale and rigid, trying to calm her, but she shoved him away. Around them, guests whispered and stared, phones raised like hungry eyes. A voice, steady, professional, came from the venue manager at the podium. "The original depositor declined this schedule change. We must follow protocol." The crowd erupted. Someone shouted, "What does that mean?" Another said, "She's kidding, right?" But it wasn't a joke. Mr. Alvarez stood firm, clipboard in hand, his tone apologetic but unyielding. "Without written approval from the original depositor, this event cannot be certified as an authorized ceremony under venue policy." The camera zoomed in on Haley's face as realization dawned. She looked around wildly, searching for someone to blame, someone to scream at. And when she found none, she screamed at the air. "That old witch did this. She did this to me." I could almost hear her voice ringing through the chandeliers, that high, cutting tone that always made everything sound uglier. She grabbed the edge of the cake table, almost knocking it over. The guests tried to pull her back, but the damage was done not just to the cake, but to her carefully crafted image. By the next morning, the clip had millions of views. Someone who worked at the venue had uploaded it with the caption, "Influencer bride humiliated after her mother-in-law canceled the wedding she secretly paid for." The comments came fast and merciless. "Karma from a Texas grandma, she's a legend. This is why you don't mess with women who built the life you're standing on." The ill-mannered bride, what a disgrace. The old lady is so cool. Even local news stations picked it up. A Texas social media influencer's dream wedding turned into a viral nightmare, one anchor said. Sources claim the original contract holder, believed to be the groom's mother, withdrew approval due to a breach of agreement. I just sipped my coffee and listened to the waves outside my window. Jeremy called 12 times that day. I didn't answer. When he finally sent a voicemail, his voice trembled between anger and regret. "Mom, please, just pick up. You don't understand what you've done. They're tearing us apart online. Sponsors are backing out. Haley's losing contracts. Please call me." I turned the phone face down and let it buzz itself quiet. By evening, the story had reached every corner of the internet. Screenshots of the venue's policy were circulating. People had found the contract online public record and highlighted the clause in red. Any schedule change requires written approval from the original depositor. There was my name, Maureen Carter, in black ink. Some users turned it into a meme. One showed Haley's crying face with the caption, "When you realize the old lady you ghosted still owns the timeline." Another had my name superimposed on a cowboy hat logo, "Maureen from Texas, 1, entitled couple, 0. Within 48 hours, the damage had spread beyond the internet. Their honeymoon deal in the Maldives was canceled. The resort issued a polite statement citing reputation concerns. Then came the legal part. Without venue authorization, the officiant's certification was void, meaning the marriage was never legally filed in Texas records. In Texas, the ceremony had to be recognized by a verified officiant under an approved contract. The change of date nullified it. Technically, they weren't married at all. Haley posted a tearful video 2 days later. Her face was blotchy, makeup streaked. "This is harassment," she sobbed. "I tried to make peace with her. I tried to love her, but she wanted control. She ruined the happiest day of my life because she's jealous and bitter." Her followers flooded the comments not with sympathy, but with scorn. "You didn't try to love her, you tried to erase her. She built the path you walked on, and you kicked her for it. Texas grandma energy, we salute you, Maureen." I didn't read them all, but Helen, my old friend who lived here in Greece, sent me screenshots, laughing softly as she did. "You're famous," she said. "I'm tired," I replied. But fame wasn't what this was. It was clarity. For the first time, the world saw what I had seen all along, the way entitlement hides behind smiles, how cruelty can dress up as charm. That night, as I sat by the balcony watching the sunset bleed into the sea, I thought about Jeremy, about the boy who once brought home wilted flowers from the park because he wanted to make me smile. I wondered if he was still inside there somewhere, or if Haley had convinced him that love was a performance, not a promise. The phone buzzed one last time, another message from him. I didn't open it, I didn't need to. The world had already delivered the message I'd been too tired to send, that actions have echoes, and sometimes silence can be louder than any revenge. Below my balcony, the church bells rang for evening service. Their sound was soft, forgiving. I closed my eyes and whispered to the air, "It wasn't vengeance, George. It was just truth finding its voice." Not every silence is empty. Some carry all the words the heart could no longer afford to say. And the waves, patient as time, kept rolling toward the shore, erasing every footprint except the ones that mattered. The letter came folded twice, slipped beneath my hotel room door like an afterthought. The paper was creased, smudged at the corners, written in the handwriting I used to see on crayon birthday cards and Mother's Day notes that said, "You're the best, Mom." For a moment, I just stared at it. My name, Maureen Carter, was written in shaky blue ink. He hadn't called me Mom on the envelope, just my name. That small omission told me everything before I even opened it. The sea outside was whispering against the cliffs of Santorini. I sat by the open window, letting the breeze move through my hair, and unfolded the letter. "Mom, I don't know where to begin. You probably don't want to hear from me, and I wouldn't blame you if you threw this away. But please, just read it once. I owe you that much." My eyes moved slowly across the page. I could almost hear his voice, the hesitation between lines, the guilt hiding behind every word. Everything fell apart after that video. Haley's sponsors dropped her within 48 hours. She can't walk into a store without people whispering. She says they look at her like she's a fraud. Maybe she is. Maybe we both are. I took a deep breath, the salty air cutting sharp against the back of my throat. I lost my job last week. The company said they needed to protect their image. Family controversy, they called it. They didn't even give me a chance to explain. I guess the internet never forgets. Every search of my name leads to that video. People joke that I married an influencer and got influenced right out of my career. The words blurred for a moment. I closed my eyes and pressed the paper to my chest. I didn't feel triumph, not satisfaction, just a slow, aching quiet. Haley blames you for everything, but I can't. I think part of me always knew this would happen. He had written several sentences and scratched them out so hard the paper nearly tore. When the ink returned, his words were smaller, like he was afraid to see them. You were the one who sold blood, so I could go to college. Haley told people I was self-made. I never corrected her. I didn't tell them who sat up nights making sandwiches for me when I couldn't afford food, who pawned her wedding ring when I needed a new laptop, for people who never learned what love costs. I stopped reading there, my eyes filling with tears that had waited too long. I hadn't cried at the wedding text, or when Haley's insults hit me like stones, or even when my name went viral. But now, alone in a whitewashed room overlooking the sea, I wept. The paper trembled in my hands as I continued. Mom, I don't expect forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. Haley says we should sue, but I told her no. I told her the truth, that you had every right. That maybe this was the only way I'd finally understand what you'd been trying to teach me all along. I don't want you to forgive me. I just want you to know that I see you now. You always stood up, even when everyone thought you'd break. You're the only one in this family who hasn't fallen apart. I used to think strength meant being loud, being in control. Now I know it means surviving without needing to prove anything. Kung chua dung goi me langui mang me. Nung me langui duinyot kong guk nga. If I could, I'd come to see you. But I won't. You deserve peace, and I've already taken too much from you. So I'll stay where I am and hope that, maybe, someday, you'll let me see you from a distance. That's all I can ask for. Love, always. Jeremy. When I finished, I sat still for a long time. The wind played with the corners of the pages, lifting them gently, like even the air wanted to touch the apology. I looked out at the blue horizon, where the Aegean met the sky. I imagined Jeremy somewhere back in Texas, his shoulders hunched, his pride finally quiet. Maybe Haley was pacing their kitchen, shouting about followers and lost sponsorships. Maybe she was still too busy blaming to feel anything else. But my son, he had felt it. The crack between pride and truth. I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside my journal. I didn't need to write back. He didn't ask for that, and I wasn't ready to give it. Some forgiveness takes time, not because of anger, but because silence deserves its own season to bloom. That evening, I walked along the narrow streets of Oya. The sky burned gold over the white rooftops, and children ran past, laughing in a language I didn't understand but somehow still felt. I stopped by a small shop and bought a single seashell pendant, delicate, pearly, simple. The woman who sold it smiled and said, "It brings peace to those who've been wounded." I wore it that night when I sat at dinner alone. I ordered wine, the dry kind George used to like, and raised my glass toward the sea. To strength, I whispered, and to the ones who finally see it. The next morning, I went to the hotel front desk and extended my stay by 2 weeks. The clerk asked if I wanted to celebrate something special. Yes, I said, smiling faintly, the end of pretending. And as I walked back to my room, the sound of the waves outside seemed softer somehow, as if the ocean itself was saying, "You did enough. Rest now." The letter from the venue arrived in a thick, white envelope stamped with a golden seal. I found it waiting at the hotel reception one quiet morning, the clerk handing it to me as though it carried sacred weight. I turned it over in my hands before opening it. The handwriting on the front was neat and deliberate, Mr. Benjamin Alvarez, the Rosewood Estate. I took it to the terrace and sat where I could see the sea. The sun was rising over the caldera, spreading its light like forgiveness. When I finally broke the seal, a faint scent of ink and paper drifted upward, familiar and almost comforting. Dear Mrs. Carter, please allow me to extend a personal and professional apology on behalf of the Rosewood Estate. I was unaware that our team approved a date change without your written consent. Our internal review showed the lapse, and the responsibility is ours. The incident has caused unnecessary embarrassment to your family, and for that, I am deeply sorry. I smiled faintly at that last word, embarrassment. That was one way to describe it, but I kept reading. While revisiting our archives to understand how this could have happened, I found something remarkable. 30 years ago, our records show a handwritten letter from you addressed to my father, who managed the venue at the time. It was written after an event where a grieving family felt mistreated by staff. Your letter was not a complaint, but a lesson in compassion. You told my father that hospitality is not about flowers and chandeliers, but about making room for the human heart, no matter how broken it arrives. That letter saved our family business. My father implemented your suggestions, and because of that, we avoided a lawsuit that might have destroyed us. When I read it now, I realized that the Rosewood Estate would not exist today if it weren't for you. I leaned back in my chair, the words washing over me like warm water. I barely remembered writing that letter. I'd been in my 40s then, a widow with little more than determination and a typewriter. I had no idea anyone even kept it. It is for that reason, Mrs. Carter, that we would like to make something right, not just for the mistake made at your son's wedding, but for the legacy you unknowingly left behind. We would be honored if you would accept the position of Honorary Cultural Advisor for the Rosewood Estate. We are launching a new initiative titled Honor the Silent Ones, to recognize the unseen hands and hearts, especially mothers and widows who make celebrations possible, yet are so often forgotten once the lights dim. My hands trembled slightly as I continued. We would like to erect a permanent plaque at the entrance of the ballroom in your name. It will read, "To the forgotten mothers who built these days of joy, your love was the first foundation. If you consent, we will unveil it this fall. Please know that this gesture is not charity. It is acknowledgement long overdue. With deepest respect, Benjamin Alvarez." I folded the letter carefully, then read it again, slower this time. It wasn't the apology that struck me, it was the memory. The image of that old typewriter came back to me, the one Jeremy used to complain about because its keys were too stiff. I had written that letter after seeing a woman cry outside the ballroom, a mother who'd been told she was in the way at her daughter's funeral reception. I couldn't stand the idea of kindness having rules, so I wrote to the manager. And now, decades later, that same kindness had circled back. I wrote a reply that afternoon, in long, cursive strokes that filled a single page. Dear Mr. Alvarez, your letter found me at exactly the right time. I accept your apology, not because it was necessary, but because it was sincere. You don't owe me anything, but I'll gladly accept your invitation to help remind others that love has no expiration date. I don't need recognition, but if my story helps another woman find her voice, then I'm willing. Sincerely, Maureen Carter. I sealed it and left it at the hotel front desk to be sent back to Texas. Then, for the first time since everything began, I allowed myself to feel proud, not the kind of pride that boasts, but the quiet kind that comes from knowing you've lived long enough to see the circle complete. In front of the grand oak doors, they unveiled the new plaque. A week later, photos showed the plaque glimmering in the morning sunday. Someone had placed a bouquet of white lilies beneath it. In the photo, Mr. Alvarez stood beside his staff, heads bowed, and behind them, guests gathered in silence. The comments flooded in once again, this time softer, reverent. She turned humiliation into heritage. Texas justice meets grace. Honor the silent ones. Amen. I watched those pictures on my phone from thousands of miles away, tears forming quietly. The same place that once broke my heart now carried my name as a promise to others. There was poetry in that. That evening, I walked down to the shore and let the water reach my ankles. I thought of all the mothers who had stood in doorways, invisible in photos, uninvited to their children's victories. Women who gave everything and were told they gave too much. This plaque wasn't just for me, it was for them. As the sun disappeared behind the cliffs, I whispered, "We're seen now." The waves answered in their steady rhythm, as if saying, "Finally." It was late spring when I met Maya Thompson. The Rosewood estate had just reopened its doors after the scandal, this time wearing its new slogan proudly across the entrance, "Honor the Silent Ones." I'd returned to Texas at Mr. Alvarez's invitation, mostly to attend the dedication ceremony in person, but part of me wanted to see if I still belonged anywhere near that place. That morning, as I walked through the garden where brides once posed for photos, I noticed a young woman sitting alone on a bench, her apron folded neatly beside her. Her eyes were red, her hands trembling as she clutched a small envelope. When she looked up and saw me, she tried to smile. "Morning," I said softly. "You okay, sweetheart?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "Not really, ma'am. I just got let go." I sat down beside her. "For what reason?" She swallowed hard. "Because I'm pregnant. I didn't tell anyone, but the manager found out. He said it would send the wrong message to guests if I kept working here." Her voice broke on the word wrong. She looked barely 20, with kind brown eyes and a softness that made her seem like someone who'd apologize for crying. "What's your name?" I asked. "Maya. Maya Thompson. And how far along are you?" "4 months," she whispered. "The father's in the Navy. He wanted to marry me before he shipped out, but the church turned us away because we couldn't afford the fees. We were just going to sign papers at the courthouse." I looked around the garden, the same garden where Haley had thrown her tantrum, where champagne had once spilled like arrogance. The sun was warm that day, the roses in bloom, the wind kind. For the first time in a long while, the place felt alive again. "Maya," I said, "how would you like to get married right here?" She blinked at me. "Ma'am?" "Right here," I repeated, gesturing at the vines and the fountain. "No fees, no photographers, just you, the man you love, and a few witnesses who actually care." Her mouth fell open, and then the tears came again, faster this time. I can't afford." I touched her hand. "You don't need to afford love. You just need to show up for it." That afternoon, I went to see Mr. Alvarez. "Ben," I said, "how hard would it be to host a small wedding in the garden this weekend?" He raised an eyebrow, smiling. "For you? Easy." "For whom?" "A girl named Maya. She worked here. She was fired because of a mistake your new assistant made." He looked startled, then nodded quickly. "Consider it done. We'll make it right." And so, 2 days later, under a sky clear enough to make you believe in second chances, Maya and her fiancé, Daniel, stood together in the garden. She wore a simple white dress borrowed from one of the housekeepers, and he wore his Navy uniform, freshly pressed and gleaming in the sunday. I brought lilies from my backyard, the same flowers George once gave me every anniversary. Just a handful of us, Ben, 2 staff members, and the breeze carrying birdsong through the air. When the officiant finished the vows, Maya turned to me with tears spilling freely down her cheeks. "You're the first person who believed in me," she said, her voice shaking. "The first mother I've ever had who looked at me like I wasn't a mistake." I felt something inside me soften, something that had been hard and aching for too long. I took her hands in mine. "Sweetheart," I whispered, "you were never a mistake. You're the reason the world keeps turning." Someone recorded the ceremony, a quiet, grainy clip posted later on social media. It showed Maya laughing through her tears, Daniel kissing her hand, me standing beside them like a proud ghost from another time. The caption read, "No designer dress, no diamonds, just love, the real kind." Within hours, it spread across platforms. The same pages that mocked Haley now shared Maya's wedding. Comment sections filled with warmth this time. "This is what marriage should look like. A Texas grandma strikes again, but this time with grace. No filters, no sponsors, just heart." I didn't read all the comments, but I saw enough to know that people were tired of pretending, tired of perfection that cost too much and meant too little. After the vows, Daniel saluted me. "Ma'am, thank you for giving us this day." I smiled. Don't thank me. Just love her right. That'll be thanks enough. When everyone had gone, I stayed behind, standing in the same sunlight that once burned my heart and now warmed it again. The plaque at the entrance gleamed in the distance, catching the last light of the day. To the forgotten mothers who built these days of joy, your love was the first foundation. Maya ran back to hug me before leaving. Her belly brushed softly against mine. We're naming her after you, she said shyly. If it's a girl. That caught me off guard. You don't have to. She smiled. We want to. Because you gave us this start. When they drove away, I watched the dust rise behind their car and thought of how strange it is the way love finds its way back to those who stop demanding it. The world had finally seen one kind of wedding crumble and another kind of love rise from its ashes, and in that quiet garden in Texas, for the first time in years, I felt completely at peace. When I finally returned to Texas, the air felt heavier than I remembered. The wide sky was still the same, painted in that faded gold that only Texas sunsets can make, but home itself had changed. The roses in my yard had grown wild during the months I was gone, and a few petals scattered across the porch like quiet confessions. There was a letter waiting for me inside the mailbox, its edges curled by heat. I recognized Jeremy's handwriting before I even picked it up. My heart didn't race, it only settled into a deep, familiar ache. I took it inside, set down my suitcase, and made myself a cup of chamomile tea before I opened it. Mom? I heard about the ceremony for you at the Rosewood estate. I saw the pictures of the plaque. You looked peaceful. I didn't think you'd come back to Texas, but part of me hoped you would. Haley's gone. She moved to Los Angeles. I don't blame her for leaving. People can be cruel, and she can't stand being looked at anymore. The world moved on from the scandal, but we didn't. Maybe that's what guilt does. It stays long after the headlines fade. I've been in therapy, trying to figure out how I became the kind of man who could forget his own mother. It's not easy facing that version of myself. You raised me to be kind, but somewhere along the way, I confused kindness with weakness. I mistook silence for surrender. You proved me wrong. I don't ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just hope that someday, when you look out your window and see the road stretching past your fence, you might imagine me walking there, quietly, not to disturb you, just to be near. Conchimong, duk taime, dulatusa. Love always. Jeremy. I read it twice. Then I folded it carefully and placed it beside the teapot. The steam from the cup rose in delicate swirls, fading just as softly as the years that had passed between us. For a long while, I didn't move. I just listened to the tick of the kitchen clock and the hum of the cicadas outside. He wanted to see me from afar. That was enough. Sometimes, distance is the only way to keep love intact. I carried my tea to the porch and sat down in the old rocking chair George built decades ago. The wood creaked beneath me in the same comforting rhythm as before. I looked out at the fading light and let my thoughts settle. The garden, overgrown and unruly, was still mine. The life I'd built, quiet, resilient, stitched together from loss and small acts of courage, was still mine. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a ghost in anyone's story. I went back inside as dusk fell and took out the leather-bound journal I'd kept since the day George died. The pages smelled faintly of dust and lavender. I opened to a fresh page, dipped my pen in ink, and began to write. They thought they buried me under their pride, but I was only planting roots. I don't need apologies or recognition. I just needed the truth to breathe again. I paused, watching the ink dry, then continued. I didn't destroy their wedding. I simply reminded them who unlocked the door to it. Love may fade, but memory doesn't. And sometimes, remembering is the most powerful justice of all. I signed my name, just Maureen, and closed the book. Outside, the last of the sun slipped behind the horizon, turning the sky to copper and violet. I stood, walked to the window, and looked out toward the long road Jeremy had mentioned in his letter. It stretched on for miles, empty now, bathed in soft evening light. Somewhere out there, maybe he really was walking, not to be forgiven, but to understand. I pressed my palm to the cool glass and whispered, That's close enough, son. Then, I turned off the lights, set my teacup in the sink, and locked the door gently behind me, not as a barrier, but as a quiet reminder. If you've ever been silenced, overlooked, or told you were too old to matter, I hope this story reminds you of something simple and powerful. You don't need to raise your voice to be heard. You just need to outlive the lies and let your dignity do the talking. Thank you for spending this time with me. If Maureen's story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to Grandma True Stories, where every week we open another memory that refused to stay buried. Because revenge may grow cold, but truth never fades. Now go on, sweetheart. Have some tea, hold your peace, and remember, wisdom doesn't shout. It remembers.